Deep in America's heartland, where generations of farmers have worked the soil without question, Thomas Miller stumbled upon something that would shatter our understanding of life itself. In his century-old barn, nestled among common chicken eggs, lay 3 obsidian spheres, eggs black as the deepest void, with surfaces that seemed to swallow light itself. As his trembling hands reached for them, they pulsed with an otherworldly warmth, a gentle throb that matched his quickening heartbeat. What emerged from those eggs would not only transform his failing farm, but challenge everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. This is the story of how a simple farmer became the guardian of something ancient and powerful, something that would make the world hold its breath in wonder and terror. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Miller wiped sweat from his brow as dawn painted his cornfields in shades of gold. The morning ritual of checking his crops hadn't changed in the 15 years since he'd inherited the farm from his father. Each day began the same: coffee at 4:30 a.m., boots on by 4:45, and out to face whatever challenges the land had in store. But lately, those challenges had grown steeper. The bank letters piled up on his kitchen table told a story of mounting debt and declining yields. 3 years of drought had taken their toll, and the modern mega-farms squeezing in from all sides made it harder for small operations like his to survive. "Maybe Dad was right," he muttered, kneeling to examine a withering cornstalk. "Maybe the old ways can't keep up anymore." The thought stung. This land had been in the Miller family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had broken the soil. With nothing but a mule and raw determination, his grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl by refusing to give up when others fled west. His father had resisted the call of corporate buyouts in the 80s, keeping the farm independent when neighbors sold out. Now it all rested on Thomas's shoulders, and he was failing. He stood, joints creaking from years of hard labor. At 45, he felt twice his age some mornings. The drought had carved new lines in his weathered face, and his dark hair had started graying at the temples. His wife, Marie, said it made him look distinguished, but he knew she worried. He saw it in her eyes each time she balanced their dwindling checkbook. The old barn loomed ahead, its timbers weathered but still proud. If any building embodied the soul of Miller Farm, it was this one. Built by his great-grandfather's own hands, its walls had witnessed generations of births, deaths, triumphs and failures. Thomas had played here as a boy, learning farm life at his father's knee. Now his own son, James, did the same, when he wasn't busy with schoolwork or helping with chores. Inside, the familiar scents of hay and livestock greeted him. Their small flock of chickens clucked softly in their pens, while the 2 remaining dairy cows watched him with lazy eyes. They'd had to sell most of the herd last spring to make mortgage payments, another piece of his heritage chipped away by economic reality. Thomas moved through his morning routine mechanically, his mind wandering to the stack of bills waiting. In the house, the bank had given him until the end of harvest to catch up on payments if the crop didn't yield enough this year. A sharp cluck from the chicken coop interrupted his dark thoughts. Emma, their oldest hen, was making an unusual fuss. Thomas frowned. Emma was typically the calmest of their flock, not prone to excitement. "What's got you worked up, old girl?" he murmured, approaching her nesting box. The hen paced agitatedly, pecking at something in the corner of her enclosure. Thomas leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. Among the normal brown eggs lay something odd, a dark shape that seemed to absorb what little illumination reached it. "What in the world?" His calloused fingers reached for the object, expecting the smooth coolness of an eggshell. Instead, he encountered a surface that felt alive, thrumming with subtle energy that made his skin tingle. His breath caught as he lifted it into better light. It was an egg, but unlike any he'd ever seen. perfectly oval. Its shell was the deepest black imaginable, seeming to draw in light rather than reflect it. As he turned it in his hands, faint patterns shifted across its surface like oil on water. It was beautiful, it was impossible, and it was warm, far warmer than any egg should be. A sound behind him made him whirl around, nearly dropping the strange object. But it was just James, his 12-year-old son, standing in the barn doorway. "Dad?" James asked, his young face scrunched in curiosity. "What's that?" Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? As he stood there, speechless, the egg in his hands gave a subtle pulse like a heartbeat. The black egg's warmth lingered on Thomas's palms long after he'd hidden it in an old horse blanket. He'd found 2 more among the chicken nests, each identical to the first, each pulsing with that same impossible heat. He hadn't told Marie yet. How could he explain something he couldn't understand himself? But keeping the secret was becoming harder. Things were changing. It started with the chickens. They'd gone from producing 3 or 4 eggs a day to nearly 20, despite having the same number of hens. The eggs were perfectly normal, brown, white, speckled, but the sudden increase made no sense. Then the barn itself began to feel different. The air grew thick with an electric tension, like the moment before a summer storm. The wooden beams seemed to hum with a subtle vibration that Thomas felt more than heard. Even the mice that usually scurried through the hay had vanished. James noticed too. "Dad," he said one morning while helping with feed, "the corn by the barn looks weird." Thomas followed his son's pointing finger. The boy was right. The withered stalks nearest the barn stood straight and green, their leaves a vibrant emerald that stood out sharply against the drought-stricken fields beyond. A perfect circle of health radiating from the barn, as if something was feeding the soil. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The egg's presence nagged at his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Marie, and walked to the barn in his pajamas and boots. The moment he opened the door, he knew something was different. The air sparkled with tiny motes of light, like dust caught in sunbeams. Except it was midnight, and there was no sun. They danced around him as he walked, responding to his movements as if alive. The eggs lay where he'd hidden them, but the horse blanket had begun to change. Its worn fibers now shimmered with an opalescent quality, as if the material itself was transforming. When he touched it, it felt like silk instead of rough wool. A soft grinding sound made him freeze. It was coming from the eggs. Heart pounding, Thomas carefully unwrapped them. The black surfaces had developed hairline cracks, geometric patterns that glowed with a faint blue light. As he watched, the cracks spread like frost across a window pane. They were hatching. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone to call James. The boy deserved to see this, whatever this was. But before his fingers could touch the screen, every light bulb in the barn exploded simultaneously, showering him with glass. In the total darkness that followed, the egg's blue glow intensified. The grinding sound grew louder, more urgent. Something was pushing its way out. Thomas stood rooted to the spot, equal parts terrified and fascinated. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to run, to call authorities, to do anything except stand there watching. But a deeper instinct held him in place. These eggs had chosen his farm, his barn. Whatever was emerging had come here for a reason. The first shell split with a sound like breaking ice. A tendril of light, bright as a welder's torch, reached into the darkness. Thomas shielded his eyes, but not before he glimpsed something moving. Within that radiance, something that defied description. As the second and third eggs began to crack, a high-pitched tone filled the air, rising in frequency until his teeth ached. The temperature in the barn plummeted, his breath fogging in front of his face. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The tone cut off. The cold vanished. Even the strange motes of light disappeared. In the darkness, something moved, something breathed, and then it spoke. "Do not be afraid, Thomas Miller." The voice resonated not in his ears, but directly in his mind, a chorus of whispers and harmonies that made his skull vibrate. 3 figures stood before him, their forms shifting like smoke in wind. They were vaguely humanoid, but composed entirely of swirling light and shadow, their bodies transparent yet somehow solid. Where their faces should have been, 3 pairs of luminous eyes gazed at him with ancient intelligence. Colors rippled through their forms, deep blues, purples, and greens that had no earthly equivalent. Thomas's legs gave out, and he sat hard on the barn floor. "What? What are you?" The beings moved closer, floating rather than walking. There, light cast no shadows, yet illuminated everything in ethereal clarity. "We are the cedars," they replied in unison, their thought voice gentler now. "We are those who nurture life across the vast expanse of space and time." One of them extended what might have been an arm, gesturing at the now empty eggshells. "These vessels brought us to you because your heart called to us, Thomas Miller. Your connection to this land, your devotion to nurturing life despite adversity, it drew us across the stars." Thomas struggled to process their words. His mind kept trying to reject what his eyes were seeing, to rationalize the impossible beings before him. Why me? Why here? "Your world stands at a crossroads," they answered. "The balance between nature and progress tips toward destruction. We have come to help restore that balance, beginning with this small piece of earth you tend." The second being moved toward the barn wall, passing straight through it as if it were mist. A moment later, Thomas heard James's startled yelp from outside. His paternal instinct overrode his fear, and he scrambled to his feet. "My son," he started, but the third being raised a luminous appendage in a calming gesture. "The boy must see," it said. "He will be part of what comes." James burst through the barn door, freezing at the sight of the ethereal creatures. His eyes went wide, but surprisingly, no fear showed on his face, only wonder. "Dad," he whispered, "are they angels?" The beings emanated what felt like amusement. "We are far older than your concepts of divine messengers," they said. "We were seeding life across galaxies when your planet was still cooling from its birth." As if to demonstrate, one of them touched a nearby dead plant. Instantly, it burst into vibrant life, not just returning to health, but evolving into something new, a hybrid of earthly vegetation and something distinctly alien. Its leaves shimmered with bioluminescence, and its flowers emitted a soft humming. "Sound! This is only the beginning," they said. "We offer you a choice, Thomas Miller. We can help you save your farm, heal your land, and show you wonders beyond imagining. But there will be those who fear what we bring. They will come for us and for you. Are you prepared for what that means?" Thomas looked at James, seeing the same decision weighing in his son's eyes. The boy gave a small nod, and Thomas turned back to the beings. "This land has been in my family for generations," he said, his voice finding strength. "If you're offering to help us protect it, to make it thrive again, then yes. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The cedar's light pulsed with approval. "Then let us begin the transformation. But first, you should wake your wife. Marie Miller deserves to know why her garden will never be quite the same again." Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Thomas's world had changed, forever in a single night, and somehow he knew this was only the beginning. Marie Miller stood in what used to be her vegetable garden, hands pressed against her mouth in astonishment. Where yesterday there had been withered tomato plants and struggling beans, now rose something out of a science fiction novel. The plants had transformed overnight, their structures altered into forms that seemed to blend earthly and alien biology. Tomatoes glowed from within, pulsing softly with bioluminescent light. Bean vines had developed intricate spiral patterns, their pods crystalline and somehow hovering inches above their stems. In the center, her prized rosebush had evolved into a towering structure that sang in harmonic tones when the wind blew. Through its iridescent flowers, "It's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch one of the crystalline beans. It chimed softly at her touch, its surface warm and alive. The cedars hovered nearby, their forms rippling with pleased energy. "This is but a small demonstration," they communicated. "Your crops can become more than mere sustenance. They can heal, nurture, and transform the land itself." Thomas watched his wife's reaction carefully. He'd spent an hour explaining everything to her, expecting disbelief or fear. Instead, she'd listened with increasing excitement. Her scientific mind, she'd studied biology in college before returning to help run the farm, already racing with possibilities. The molecular structure must be completely reorganized. She mused, examining a glowing tomato. But how do they maintain stability? The energy requirements alone should be... A distant engine sound made them all freeze. A truck was coming up their long driveway. "Hide!" Thomas hissed to the cedars, but they made no move to conceal themselves. "It is time others began to see," they said calmly. "Change cannot remain hidden forever." The truck belonged to Bill Henderson, their nearest neighbor who supplied their feed. He stopped dead as he stepped out of his vehicle, keys dropping from nerveless fingers. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, staring at the transformed garden. Then his eyes found the cedars, and his face went chalk white. "Tom, what in God's name?" Before Thomas could respond, the beings moved forward. Bill stumbled backward, hitting his truck. But the cedars simply gestured, and suddenly every withered plant around the driveway burst into vibrant, impossible life. Grass became a carpet of swirling patterns, each blade tipped with tiny lights. Weeds transformed into delicate structures of living crystal. "Your fear is unnecessary," they told Bill, their thought voice gentle but firm. "We bring renewal, not destruction." To demonstrate, they touched Bill's truck. The rusty old pickup shuddered, and before everyone's eyes, patches of living metal began to grow across its surface. The engine revved once, then settled into a purr smoother than it had ever made before. "How—" Bill's voice cracked. "How did—" "They're here to help," James piped up, coming to stand beside the trembling man. "They're going to save all the farms, aren't they?" He looked at the cedars questioningly. "That is our hope," they responded. "But others must choose to accept change, as your family has." Bill looked at Thomas, then at the transformed garden, then at his humming truck. Slowly his terror began to fade, replaced by something like wonder. "The drought's been killing us." "All," he said quietly. "Corporate farms breathing down our necks, banks ready to foreclose. If you're really offering help—" A sound like distant thunder interrupted him, but the sky was clear. The cedars turned as one, their light dimming slightly. "They come sooner than expected," they said. "The instruments of those who fear change. Approach." In the distance, helicopter rotors chopped the air. 2 black helicopters appeared over the tree line, their approach sending waves of anxiety through the small group gathered in the transformed garden. Military markings were clearly visible on their sides. "Inside," Thomas urged his family. But the cedars remained motionless, their luminous forms bright against the morning sky. "The time for hiding has passed," they communicated. "What comes next will determine much." The helicopters circled once, then landed in the fallow field beside the barn. Armed soldiers poured out, rifles raised, followed by figures in white hazmat, suits carrying strange equipment. Their boots crushed the newly transformed grass, which chimed in protest. "This is a secure federal operation," a voice boomed through a megaphone. "Remain where you are, and make no sudden movements." Bill Henderson's truck roared to life on its own. its living metal surface rippling as it moved itself between the soldiers and the Miller family. The cedars raised their luminous appendages, and suddenly every transformed plant in the area began to glow intensely. "Your weapons are unnecessary," their thought voice resonated, now powerful enough that even the soldiers clutched their heads at its strength. "We are not here to harm." A man in a black suit emerged from the second helicopter, his bearing radiating. "Authority. I'm Director Collins, Advanced Threat Assessment Division," he announced, walking forward with measured steps. "We detected massive energy signatures and biological anomalies from this location. What exactly are we dealing with here?" The cedars moved toward him, their light dimming to a less threatening level. The soldiers' rifles tracked their movement, but Collins raised a hand, holding them back. "We are the cedars," they answered, their voice now focused solely on Collins. "We come to heal, to transform, to restore balance. Your world teeters on the edge of ecological collapse. We offer a way forward." One of the hazmat-suited figures rushed forward, holding up a beeping device. "Sir, the energy readings are off the charts. Nothing in our database matches this signature." Collins studied the cedars intently. "And you chose this farm. Why?" "Because here we found what we sought, those who understand the true meaning of nurturing life." The beings gestured at Thomas and his family. "This land has been loved and tended for generations. It is the perfect place to begin." "Begin what exactly?" Answer. The cedars touched the ground simultaneously. A wave of transformation rippled outward, like a stone dropped in a pond. Everywhere it passed, the land came alive with their changes. Withered cornstalks evolved into towering structures of living crystal and chlorophyll. The air filled with floating spores that glowed like starlight. The soldiers stepped back in alarm, but Collins remained still, watching the display with calculating eyes. "Imagine," the cedars continued, "crops that never fail, that purify the soil and air as they grow, plants that can flourish in any climate, produce unprecedented yields, heal the damage your species has wrought. We offer this freely, but it must be accepted freely." "Sir," one of the hazmat technicians called out, "these transformations, they're rewriting the basic laws of biology. The implications could be either salvation or catastrophe." Collins finished. He turned to Thomas. "Mr. Miller, you've had the most contact with these beings. What's your assessment? Can they be trusted?" Before Thomas could answer, a new sound joined the helicopter's idling rotors. A convoy of vehicles approaching fast. The cedars' light pulsed with concern. "More come," they warned. "Those who would seek to control rather than understand. You must choose quickly, Director Collins. Will you be an ally in healing your world, or an obstacle to be overcome?" Sufib. Convoy's engines grew louder as Collins faced his moment of decision. Director Collins's decision changed everything. Instead of containment, he chose cooperation. Within hours, the Miller farm had been designated a secure research zone, with a peculiar mix of scientists and soldiers setting up camp at its edges. But the farm itself remained under Thomas's control, thanks to Collins's intervention. "We need to understand these changes," Collins had explained, "but we need to do it right. These beings chose your family for a reason. We'll work with that." Now, a week later, Thomas watched in amazement as Marie led a team of botanists through the transformed cornfield. His wife had become the unofficial liaison between the scientists and the cedars, her background in biology proving invaluable. "The DNA structure is completely unprecedented," she explained, gesturing at a cornstalk that had evolved into a crystalline spire dripping with golden liquid. "It's corn, but it's also something else. The yield is 4 times normal, and it can grow in practically any soil." The cedars hovered nearby, their light rippling with what Thomas had learned to recognize as pleasure. They seemed to enjoy Marie's enthusiasm, often communicating complex biological concepts directly into her mind. James had adapted fastest of all. The boy spent hours with the beings, learning things that made the scientist's jaws drop. He could now touch a plant and encourage it to transform, though not as dramatically as the cedars could. "It's like they're teaching him their language," Marie had said, watching their son coax a simple dandelion into a shimmering fountain of light and energy. But not everything was wonderful. Thomas saw the fear in their neighbors' eyes when they drove past. He heard the whispers in town about ungodly changes and government conspiracies. Even Bill Henderson, initially amazed, had grown quieter during his deliveries. The Cedars sensed his concern. "Change brings fear," they told him one evening as he checked on the newly transformed livestock barn. Inside, the cows had developed iridescent hides and produced milk with extraordinary properties. But fear can be overcome with understanding. Commotion at the perimeter broke their conversation. One of the military guards was arguing with a group of locals. Thomas recognized Jack Werner, whose farm bordered theirs to the south. "This ain't right," Werner was shouting. "Those things are spreading. My wheat field's starting to glow at night. What happens when it reaches the city, when it gets into the water supply?" Thomas hurried over, the cedars flowing beside him. As they approached, Werner's face contorted with a mix of fear and anger. "Keep those demons away from me," he snarled, backing up. "This is God's country, Miller. What you're doing here, it ain't natural." The cedars extended their light toward Werner's agitation. "Your crops begin to change because the land is connected," they explained, their thought voice gentle. "The transformation seeks balance. Your wheat now resists drought, produces 3 times the grain, and purifies the soil it grows in." "Why do you fear improvement?" "Because we can't control it," Collins answered, arriving at the scene. "That's what scares people. Once it starts, we can't stop it." He turned to Thomas. "The changes are spreading faster than we anticipated. The governor's office is getting involved. Pentagon too. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this quiet and contained." As if to emphasize his point, a distant flash of light drew their attention. On the horizon, Werner's entire wheat field had begun to glow, the transformation accelerating as they watched. The cedars pulsed with increased luminosity. "The time of small changes has passed," they announced. "The great transformation begins. Your world must adapt or resist." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He could see it in Collins's face too, the realization that they had passed a point of no return. Whatever happened next would reshape not just his farm, but perhaps all of human civilization. Werner crossed himself and hurried away. In the growing darkness, more fields began to shine with otherworldly light. The president declared a state of emergency on a Tuesday. Thomas watched the announcement on the small TV in their kitchen, where the leader of the free world tried to calm a panicking nation about the biological anomalies spreading across America's heartland. "We now have confirmed reports of transformed vegetation in 6 states, the president said gravely. "Our top scientists are working to understand these changes. We urge citizens to remain calm and avoid any contact with affected areas." Marie snorted from where she was examining a transformed apple under a microscope. "Avoid contact? The changes are in the groundwater now. They're in the wind. You might as well tell people to avoid breathing." She was right. In the 3 weeks since the cedars had emerged, their influence had spread far beyond the Miller farm. Satellite photos showed vast swaths of farmland glowing at night, crops transforming into their enhanced states faster than anyone could track. The cedars themselves remained calm despite the growing chaos. "Your world's resistance was anticipated," they told Thomas as they watched military vehicles rolling down the highway. "But life seeks improvement. It cannot be stopped. James burst in through the screen door, excitement painted across his young face. "Dad, the Johnsons' entire orchard just transformed. Their apple trees are floating." Indeed, through the window, Thomas could see the neighboring orchard had evolved. The trees now hovered several feet above the ground, their roots dangling in the air as they drew nutrients directly from the atmosphere. Golden apples the size of pumpkins hung from crystalline branches. Director Collins arrived an hour later, looking haggard. The military camp around the farm had tripled in size, and Thomas could see new equipment being installed: satellite dishes, monitoring stations, and what looked suspiciously like missile batteries. "It's getting out of hand," Collins announced, without preamble. "The Chinese think we've developed some kind of biological weapon. The Europeans are demanding access to study the transformations. And the agricultural companies," he shook his head, "they're panicking. These changes are making their GMO patents worthless." "The old ways become obsolete," the Cedars commented. "This is natural." "Natural?" Collins laughed harshly. "We've got crops that glow in the dark and produce enough food to end world hunger. We've got plants that clean pollution from the air and soil. We've got trees that float. The economic implications alone." He was interrupted by a commotion outside. A crowd had gathered at the military checkpoint, local farmers, their faces a mix of anger and fear. "The whole county's changing," someone shouted. "My cattle won't eat normal feed anymore. They only want the glowing stuff." "My kids are starting to have strange dreams," another voice called out. "They say they can hear the plants talking." Thomas felt a chill. James had mentioned similar dreams, but they'd dismissed it. Now he wondered, were the changes affecting more than just plants? The Cedars' light pulsed with increased intensity. "The children understand first," they said. "They are more open to the new harmony we bring." "What harmony?" Collins demanded. "What's really happening here?" Before they could answer, Marie called out from her microscope, "Thomas! Everyone! You need to see this!" They crowded around her makeshift lab setup. On the screen, cells from a transformed apple were doing something impossible. They were changing, evolving in real time. But more than that, they were reaching out, trying to connect with human cells from Marie's earlier samples. "It's not just plants changing anymore," she whispered. "The transformation, it wants to spread to us." The Cedars' light filled the room. "Now you begin to understand. This was never about simply improving your crops. It was about improving everything." Outside, more fields burst into luminescent transformation, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed in delight as she heard the flowers singing. The transformation of James began at breakfast. Thomas noticed it first, a subtle shimmer to his son's skin, like morning dew catching sunlight. Marie dropped her coffee cup when she saw it, the ceramic shattering on the floor as she rushed to examine their boy. "It doesn't hurt," James said, watching his hands with fascination. "It feels right, like waking up properly for the first time." The Cedars appeared instantly, their light pulsing with what seemed like excitement. "The first bridge is forming," they announced. "The boy leads the way, as we knew he would." "What's happening to him?" Thomas demanded, parental fear overriding his usual trust in the beings. "What have you done?" "We have done nothing that was not already beginning," they responded. "Your son's connection to our changes, his dreams of speaking with plants, these were signs. He is becoming something new, something better." Marie's scientific mind raced ahead of her maternal panic. "The cellular changes I saw, they're not just affecting plants anymore. They're creating a new form of life entirely. A hybrid." "Yes," the Cedars confirmed, "a bridge between your kind and ours, between the old world and the new one that comes." Before they could explain further, Director Collins burst in, flanked by soldiers and scientists. "We're picking up massive energy signatures all over the county," he announced, then stopped short at the sight of James. "Dear God!" The boy's transformation was accelerating. His eyes now held the same luminescent quality as the cedars, and patterns of light flowed beneath his skin like flowing water. But most startling was the way plants reacted to his presence. Every transformed vegetable in the kitchen was bending toward him, reaching out with crystalline tendrils. "He's not the only one of the scientists reported, checking a tablet. "We're getting reports of similar changes in children across the transformed zones. Dozens of cases already spreading." By the hour, Thomas moved to embrace his son, but hesitated. James smiled at his father's uncertainty. "It's okay, Dad. I'm still me. I'm just more now. I can feel everything. The plants, the soil, the changes spreading through the land. It's beautiful." The cedars moved to surround the boy, their light harmonizing with his new radiance. "This is why we chose your family, Thomas Miller. We saw in your son the potential to lead the way. The children of your world are ready to evolve beyond the limitations of their ancestors." Evolution? Collins stepped forward, his hand straying toward his holstered pistol. Or invasion? Both. Neither. The cedar's voice took on new complexity. "We are gardeners of worlds, shepherds of life's great unfolding. On countless planets, we have helped species transcend their original forms. Some resist, some embrace, but change comes regardless." Marie touched James's shimmering face. "Will it happen to all of us?" "Those who are ready will change," they answered. "Those who resist will remain as they are, but they will be left behind by what comes next." Suddenly, James gasped. His eyes widened with a new awareness. "They're coming," he whispered. "Who's coming?" Thomas asked, but part of him already knew. "The say." "Others," James said. "More cedars, thousands of them. They're coming to help with the great transformation." He looked at his parents with eyes that now saw far beyond the physical world. Everything is about to change. Through the window, the morning sky filled with falling stars. The world watched in awe and terror as thousands of obsidian eggs descended from the sky like black rain. They fell everywhere, in cities, forests, oceans, deserts. Each impact released new cedars, their combined light turning night into day. Across the globe, at the Miller farm, James stood in the transformed cornfield, his luminescent form a beacon in the darkness. Other changed children began arriving, drawn to him like moths to flame. Their parents followed, bewildered and afraid, but unable to deny the pull their children felt. "They're all connected now," Marie observed, watching as more children underwent the transformation. "It's like they're forming a network." Thomas could barely recognize their farm anymore. The transformed plants had evolved further, creating structures that defied physics and biology. Crystalline towers rose from the fields, pulsing with energy. The air itself seemed alive with floating spores that carried the changes on the wind. Director Collins's command center had descended into chaos. "We're getting reports from every major city," he announced, screens behind him showing news feeds from around the world. Paris, Tokyo, Moscow, the transformations are everywhere. No containment is possible anymore. The original cedars gathered around James, their light merging with his. "The children will guide humanity through this transition," they communicated. "They understand instinctively what adults resist. The barriers between species, between forms of life, are illusions. All can be transformed, improved, unified." As if demonstrating their words, James reached out to touch a nearby soldier. Light flowed from his fingers, and the man gasped as the change began to ripple through him. But unlike the violent resistance many adults showed to the transformation, this soldier accepted it with surprising peace. "I can see," the man whispered as his eyes began to glow. "My God, I can see everything." "The children choose well," the cedars commented. "Those ready for change recognize it when it comes." Governments around the world were reacting with predictable panic. Some launched missiles at the falling eggs, only to watch their weapons transform in mid-flight, becoming new sources of the change. Others declared martial law, trying to quarantine transformed zones, but the changes flowed through water, through air, through the roots of plants connecting continent to continent. Marie's latest tests revealed why containment was impossible. The transformation doesn't just alter DNA, she explained, showing them slides of cells in mid-change. It rewrites the fundamental laws of biology. It's creating a new operating system for life itself. Throughout it all, Thomas struggled with his role as the father of what many were now calling the first bridge. James had become something more than human, a living conduit between old and new forms of life. Other changed children looked to him for guidance, and even the cedars seemed to defer to his growing understanding of the transformation. "Dad," James called out, his voice carrying new harmonics that made the crystalline plants sing in response. "You need to see this." He led them to the barn, now a cathedral of living crystal and light. Inside, the black eggs that had started everything had begun to pulse again. "More are coming," James said, his eyes seeing far beyond the physical. But not just cedars this time, the ones who sent them, the ones who reshape worlds. The eggs cracked with a sound like breaking universes. The beings that emerged from the new eggs made the cedars look simple by comparison. They were vast intelligences of pure energy, their forms constantly shifting between shapes that human minds struggled to comprehend. Where the cedars were, like gardeners, these were the architects of life itself. "The shapers," James whispered in awe, the light under his skin pulsing in resonance with their presence. "They're the ones who designed the cedars. They create and guide the evolution of entire galaxies." The shapers filled the barn with impossible geometries of light and energy. When they spoke, it wasn't just in thoughts, but in visions that flooded everyone's minds with the history of countless worlds they had transformed. Thomas saw civilizations rising and falling across the cosmos, each one facing the choice that now confronted humanity: evolve or stagnate. Some chose to embrace transformation, becoming beings of pure energy and consciousness. Others refused and remained as they were, eventually fading into extinction. "Your world stands at the cusp of its greatest choice," the shapers communicated. "But there is something here we did not expect, something unique." They turned their attention to James, their energy fields interacting with his transformed being. The other changed. Children gathered around him began to glow more intensely. "The human capacity for adaptation exceeds our models," the shapers continued. "Your children especially. They're not just accepting our changes, they're improving upon them, creating new possibilities we never imagined." Director Collins, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Are you saying our children are evolving beyond even your expectations?" "They're becoming something new," the shapers confirmed, "a bridge not just between forms of life, but between levels of reality itself. Through them, we glimpse the next stage of cosmic evolution." Marie's scientific instruments were going haywire, detecting energy patterns that defied known physics. "The children," she gasped, looking at her readings, "they're not just changing physically. They're developing the ability to manipulate reality at the quantum level." As if to demonstrate, James raised his hand. The air around him crystallized into flowing patterns of light, and suddenly everyone could see what he saw: the underlying fabric of reality itself, vibrating with infinite possibility. "This is why the cedars chose us first," he said, his voice carrying new authority. "Our farm, our family, we were the perfect testing ground. But now it's time for the next step." The shaper's energy pulsed with what felt like approval. "The transformation spreading across your world is not just about improving life," they revealed. It is about ascending to a new level of existence, and your children will lead the way. Thomas watched his son with a mixture of pride and fear. James wasn't just changing, he was becoming something beyond human comprehension. And yet, within the luminescent being his son had become, he could still see the boy who used to help him with morning chores. "Dad," James said softly, sensing his father's conflict, "don't be afraid. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning." The Shaper's energy began to spiral around the transformed children, creating a vortex of pure possibility. "The next phase begins," they announced. "Through these young ones, we will reshape not just life but reality itself." Outside, the sky began to ripple with new colors that had never existed before. Not everyone survived the transformation. This harsh truth emerged when reports began flooding in from around the globe. While children adapted easily and some adults embraced the change, others' bodies rejected it violently. Hospitals were overwhelmed, with cases of people whose contact with transformed plants or water had triggered devastating reactions. Director Collins delivered the grim statistics in the miller's kitchen, now a makeshift command center. 30% of adults exposed to heavy transformation energy are showing severe adverse reactions. Some just can't change. Others... He paused, his face grim. Others try to change, but their bodies can't handle it. The Shapers observed this. Development with what felt like clinical detachment. Selection is natural. Not all life forms can ascend. This has been true on every world. "But you knew," Thomas accused, anger breaking through his usual awe. "You knew some people wouldn't survive this process. You're willing to sacrifice a third of humanity for your grand evolution." James, his transformed state now constantly shifting between human and energy form, placed a calming hand on his father's shoulder. The touch sent tingles of transformative energy through Thomas's body. "Dad, I can see more clearly now. This isn't just about survival. It's about the survival of consciousness itself." Marie, who had been analyzing data from affected populations, looked up from her screens. "There's a pattern to who can change and who can't. It's not random. It's like some people's consciousness is more quantum entangled, more capable of existing in multiple states simultaneously. Those are the ones who can transform. The universe evolves toward higher consciousness," the Shapers explained. "Those who cannot ascend would eventually be left behind regardless. We merely accelerate the natural process." A commotion outside drew their attention. A group of unchanged humans had gathered at the military perimeter, demanding access to the transformation zone. They'd seen the benefits, the physical perfection, the enhanced consciousness, the near immortality that came with successful transformation. They wanted in, despite the risks. "You don't understand," one woman pleaded, her sick child in her arms. "The hospitals can't help him. The transformation is his only chance." But even as she spoke, others arrived with different messages. "Stop! The transformation!" they shouted. "God made us human. This is an abomination." The Shaper's energy patterns shifted. Observe the division. It begins as it always does. Those who fear change will soon turn to violence. As if summoned by their words, distant explosions rocked the horizon. Military jets streaked overhead, and emergency broadcasts blared from every device. Some nations had decided to act, launching attacks on major transformation zones. "They cannot stop what has begun," the Shapers stated, "but they can damage the process, create chaos in the transition. Many more will die needlessly." James suddenly stiffened, his luminescent form pulsing with alarm. "Something's wrong," he announced. "The transformation, it's not just changing people and plants, it's changing something deeper. The fabric of reality itself is starting to unravel where the change is strongest." The Shaper's energy surged with what felt like concern, the first real emotion they'd shown. This is unprecedented. The human consciousness is catalyzing changes we did not predict. The boundaries between dimensions are growing thin. Through the window, they could see the sky beginning to tear, revealing impossible colors and shapes from beyond normal space-time. The transformation wasn't just changing Earth. It was changing the nature of reality itself. And no one, not even the Shapers, knew what that meant. Reality fractured above the Miller farm like breaking glass. Through the widening cracks, impossible geometries and colors poured into our universe, warping the laws of physics wherever they touched. The transformed children, led by James, could see things through these rifts that their parents couldn't comprehend. Entire dimensions of existence folding in on themselves. "The barriers are failing," James announced, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate. "What we're becoming, it's too powerful for this reality to contain." The Shaper's energy patterns showed clear distress now. "In all our world seeding, we have never encountered this. Human consciousness, once transformed, is catalyzing changes at the quantum level. You're not just evolving biology, you're evolving the fundamental structure of space-time." Marie's instruments had stopped working entirely. The laws of physics they were designed to measure no longer applied consistently. "The transformation energy is exponential now," she reported, watching reality ripple around her son. "It's not just spreading across Earth, it's spreading across dimensions." Director Collins received urgent reports from around the globe. Similar rifts are appearing worldwide. Moscow's entire downtown district just disappeared into one. Beijing reports strange entities emerging from others. "The military's weapons are useless. They just transform anything we shoot at them." Thomas watched his son with growing fear. James stood at the center of the chaos, his transformed state allowing him to somehow make sense of the madness. Other, changed children gathered around him, their combined power making the very air crackle with potential. "We need to stop this," Thomas pleaded. "The transformation, it's too much, too fast. Reality itself is breaking down." "We cannot stop it," the Shapers responded. "The process has moved beyond our control. Humanity's potential for transformation exceeds anything we imagined. You are becoming something that even we, the architects of evolution, do not understand." A new rift tore open directly above them, larger than any before. Through it, they could see what looked like another Earth, but one where the transformation had progressed further. Its entire surface was crystalline, pulsing with living light. But beyond that world, they glimpsed others, an infinite cascade of realities, each transforming, each affecting all the others. "The multiverse is transforming," James said in wonder. "Every version of Earth, every possible reality, they're all changing at once, and they're starting to merge." As if to confirm his words, objects began falling through the rift, transformed plants and creatures from other dimensions, each more impossible than the last. The Shaper's energy fluctuated wildly. "We sought to guide your evolution," they communicated urgently. "Instead, we may have initiated the end of all realities as they were. The barriers between dimensions cannot sustain this level of transformation. Soon, all possible worlds will collapse into one." "What happens then?" Thomas asked, though part of him didn't want to know. James turned to his father, his eyes showing depths of understanding that no human mind was meant to contain. "Either something entirely new will be born," he said quietly, "or everything, all realities, all dimensions, will be destroyed in the process." The rifts in the sky grew larger, and through them came a sound. The universe itself, groaning under the weight of too much change, too fast. The choice came down to James. The transformed children had gathered around him in a circle of living light, their combined consciousness reaching across dimensions. Through the rifts above, other versions of themselves did the same on countless other Earths. The Shaper's energy pulsed with increasing urgency as reality continued to unravel. The transformation can be reversed, they revealed finally. But the cost would be unimaginable. Every being that has changed would revert, not just to their original form, but to their limited consciousness. All the evolution, all the advancement would be lost. And if we don't reverse it, Thomas asked, though the crystalline structures, crumbling into dimensional rifts around them, told their own story, then the transformation continues until all realities merge. James answered for them. Everyone, everything that can transform will become part of something entirely new. Those who can't, he looked at his father with eyes that saw through time itself, they won't survive the merger. Marie stepped forward, her scientist's mind grappling with concepts that defied science itself. What about a middle ground? Can't we slow it down, control it somehow? The Shaper's energy fluctuated. There is no middle ground. The transformation has reached a quantum critical point. It must either be fully reversed or allowed to complete, and only one being has the power to make that choice. All eyes turned to James. In his transformed state, he had become a nexus point, not just for this reality, but for all of them. The first child to change had somehow become the key to all change. I can feel them, he whispered. Everyone who's transformed across every reality, their joy, their wonder at what they're becoming. But I can also feel those who are dying, those whose bodies and minds can't make the transition. And Dad, he looked at Thomas with tears of light rolling down his luminescent cheeks. You won't survive the merger. You're not compatible with the change. Thomas felt his heart break. He stepped toward his son, even as reality buckled around them. James, listen to me. Don't make your choice based on me. Make it based on what's right for everyone, for all realities. But you're my father, James said, suddenly sounding like the 12-year-old boy he'd been just weeks ago. How can I choose something that will kill you? The Shapers intervened. There is another aspect to consider. The transformed consciousness represents the next stage of universal evolution. To reverse it would be to deny countless beings across countless realities their transcendence. It would be, in essence, a form of cosmic death. Through the rifts, they could see the other Jameses facing the same choice. Each one caught between personal love and universal transformation, each one holding the power to end or enable the biggest change in the history of existence. Marie touched her son's radiant face. Whatever you choose, she said softly, know that we love you. That will never change, no matter what form any of us takes. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of infinite realities pressing in on his decision. When he opened them again, they blazed with newfound purpose. I choose, he began, but before he could finish, a new sound cut through the dimensional chaos. A sound that shouldn't have been possible. More eggs were falling from the sky, but these weren't black like the others. They were pure light. The eggs of light cracked open with a sound like singing crystals. What emerged was neither cedar nor shaper, but something else entirely. Beings of pure consciousness, their forms constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. They were beautiful and terrible to behold, their very presence making reality bend around them. The preserved, the Shapers announced, their energy patterns showing something close to awe. We thought them lost eons ago. What are they? Thomas asked, but James answered before the Shapers could. They're what we're becoming, he said, his transformed state resonating with the new entities. They're from a reality that completed the transformation, but they found a way to maintain connection with their original forms. The preserved spread out across the farm, their presence stabilizing the reality rifts temporarily. When they spoke, it was in a harmony of thoughts that everyone, transformed and untransformed alike, could understand. We come from what you would call the far future, they communicated. We are humanity transformed and transcended, but we have not forgotten what we were. We found a way to exist in both states simultaneously, to be both transformed and original. Hope surged through the gathered crowd, but the Shaper's energy darkened. This is impossible, they insisted. The quantum states cannot be maintained. Reality itself rejects such duality. Reality, the Preserved responded, is more flexible than you imagined. Your understanding, though vast, is limited by your own evolution. We discovered there is a third path, but it requires something you never considered. They turned their attention to James. You stand at a nexus point, young one. You see the choice as binary. Transform everything or revert all. But there is another way. A harder way. James's light pulsed with sudden understanding. We have to transform reality itself, he said. Not just the beings within it, but the fundamental nature of existence. Make it capable of holding both states at once. Yes, the Preserved confirmed, but such a transformation requires more than power. It requires perfect understanding of both states of being. It requires one who is both transformed and untransformed, child and ancient, singular and infinite. It requires sacrifice, James whispered. The Preserved's light dimmed slightly. To remake reality, you would have to become reality. Your consciousness would expand to encompass all possibilities, all states of being. You would exist everywhere and nowhere, in all forms and none. You would, in essence, cease to be yourself while becoming everything. Thomas stepped forward, parental instinct overriding his awe. No, there has to be another way. He's just a boy, Dad, James said softly, his light pulsing with love and sadness. I stopped being just anything the moment the first egg hatched. But I never stopped being your son. That's what makes this possible. I understand both what we were and what we can become. Through the stabilized rifts, they could see other realities where different versions of themselves were having similar revelations. The Preserved existed across all of them, showing each James the same possibility. If you choose this path, they warned, you will save everyone, but you will lose yourself. Your consciousness will become the foundation of the new reality itself. Are you prepared for such a sacrifice? Storm clouds gathered overhead, but they weren't natural formations. They were reality itself, condensing around the point of decision, waiting to see what choice would reshape existence itself. In the balance hung not just humanity's evolution, but the very nature of being. Time seemed to slow in the eye of the reality storm. The Preserved had stabilized the dimensional rifts temporarily, giving James a chance to say goodbye. Though they'd only bought minutes, those minutes stretched like years as the transformed boy faced his family for what would be the last time as himself. There has to be another way, Marie insisted, her scientist's mind racing for alternatives. The mathematical possibilities alone— Mom, James interrupted gently, his luminescent form pulsing with love. You taught me that sometimes the hardest solution is the right one, like when you left your research career to help save the farm. Thomas stood silent, tears streaming down his face. His son's light reflected in them, creating tiny prisms of impossible colors. Finally he spoke. I was supposed to protect you. That's a father's job. James moved closer, his transformed state making the air shimmer around him. You did protect me, Dad. You taught me about responsibility, about sacrifice, about doing what's right even when it hurts. That's why I can do this now. The Preserved watched this exchange with what felt like profound empathy. The bond you share, they communicated, this love between transformed and untransformed, it is exactly why you can bridge all states of being. You understand both what we were and what we can become. The Shapers, their energy patterns showing increasing concern, interjected, The stability is temporary. Reality cannot maintain this state for long. A decision must be made. Through the temporarily stabilized rifts, they could see other families in other realities having similar goodbyes, every version of James preparing for the same sacrifice across infinite dimensions. Director Collins approached, his military bearing softened by the weight of the moment. The president is on the line. They're asking for assurances, demanding to know what's happening. Tell them, James said, his voice carrying new authority, that humanity's next chapter is about to begin. Tell them that tomorrow everyone will be able to choose their own form of existence. Tell them, he looked at his parents, that a boy from a small farm is going to make sure nobody has to lose their family to progress. The preserved moved closer, their light harmonizing with James's. It begins. Reality grows unstable again. Are you prepared? James nodded, then turned to his parents one last time. The farm, he said softly, is keep it going. Not just for me, but for what it represents. The place where change and tradition learn to exist together. Marie and Thomas stepped forward together, embracing their son. Where his transformed energy touched them, they felt echoes of what he had become, glimpses of the cosmic awareness he now carried. I love you, James whispered, his form beginning to expand, to merge with the fabric of reality itself. In every form, in every reality, I'll always be your son. The storm above intensified, reality itself holding its breath for what would come next. The preserved moved into position around James, preparing to guide his consciousness as it expanded to encompass all of existence. Wait, Thomas called out suddenly. Will it hurt him? The preserved's light flickered with gentle understanding. He will feel everything, they answered honestly. But most of all, he will feel love, the love that makes this sacrifice possible. The love that will reshape reality itself. James began to rise into the air, his form growing more luminous with each passing second. The final transformation was about to begin. James's consciousness expanded like a supernova of pure thought. His physical form dissolved into pure energy, spreading outward in waves that touched every corner of reality. The preserved guided his transformation, their ancient knowledge helping to channel the immense power of his sacrifice. Through the dimensional rifts, other versions of James did the same, their combined consciousness creating a new framework for existence itself. The Shapers watched in awe as their creation surpassed them, achieving something they had never imagined possible. Thomas and Marie clung to each other as their son became everything and nothing at once. They could feel him everywhere. In the transformed plants that sang with new life, in the crystalline structures that bridged dimensions, in the very air they breathed. The integration begins, the preserved announced. Reality reshapes itself to accommodate all states of being. The change rippled outward from the farm, like rings in an infinite pond. Everywhere it touched, the fundamental nature of existence shifted. People found themselves able to choose their form, transformed, untransformed, or something in between. The forced evolution stopped, replaced by conscious choice. He's doing it, Marie whispered, watching the wave of change sweep across the horizon. He's making it possible for everyone to choose their own path. Above them, the reality storm reached its peak. Lightning made of pure consciousness arced between dimensions, sealing the rifts not by closing them, but by making them unnecessary. All possible states of existence were becoming accessible from any point in reality. The preserved's light pulsed with approval. Your son understands what we learned eons ago, that true evolution comes not from forcing change, but from embracing all possibilities. Through their expanded awareness, Thomas and Marie could feel the effects spreading globally. In cities, towns, and rural areas across every continent, people were discovering their new freedom to transform or remain as they were. The choice, that had seemed binary, was now infinite, but amid this cosmic reshaping, they felt something else, a presence, vast yet familiar, touching their minds with infinite gentleness. "James?" Thomas called out, his voice breaking. The air shimmered, and for a moment they saw him, not as the boy he had been, or the energy he had become, but as something between and beyond both states. His consciousness had become the framework of reality itself, but he had maintained a connection to who he was. "I understand now." His thoughts reached them, carrying echoes of infinite wisdom tempered by human love. We never needed to choose between progress and preservation. We just needed to make room for both. The Shaper's energy patterns showed something like humility. We who thought ourselves the shapers of life have been reshaped by it instead. Your son has achieved what we never could, true universal harmony. Reality settled into its new configuration. The transformed plants still glowed with impossible colors, but they no longer tried to force their change on others. The crystalline structures remained, but as bridges rather than barriers between states of being. Director Collins, watching his instruments try to make sense of the new reality, finally gave up. "What do we tell everyone?" he asked. "How do we explain what's happened?" "Tell them," Marie said, feeling her son's presence in every atom of existence, "that a boy from a small farm saved everyone by making room for everything. Tell them that love reshaped reality itself. The dawn broke over the transformed world, painting the sky in colors that had never existed before. In the light, Thomas and Marie could see both what was and what could be, and in everything, they felt their son's eternal love, now woven into the very fabric of existence. 1 year after James's transformation, the Miller farm had become both a sanctuary and a symbol. People came from around the world to see where reality itself had been reshaped by a boy's sacrifice and love. The transformed crops still grew alongside, traditional ones, each respecting the other's space. The crystalline structures remained, humming with energy that connected all states of being. Thomas and Marie had chosen to remain mostly untransformed, though like everyone else, they could shift states when they wished. They found comfort in their original forms, feeling closer to their memories of James as he had been, but they could also feel him constantly, in the wind that carried impossible colors, in the songs of transformed plants, in the very consciousness that now underlaid all of reality. "He's everywhere," Marie said one morning, standing in their kitchen that now existed simultaneously in multiple states of reality. "And yet, I still miss him so much." The preserved had remained as guides, helping humanity understand its new existence. "Your son's consciousness became the framework that allows all states of being to coexist," they explained. "He is, in a very real sense, the reason any of us can choose our form of existence." Director Collins, who now led a new international organization dedicated to understanding and managing humanity's transformation, visited regularly. The military base had become a research center, studying the harmonious intersection of different states of reality. "The numbers are stabilizing," he reported during one visit. "About 40% of humanity has chosen some form of transformation. 30% remain completely traditional, and the rest shift between states as needed. Just as James intended, everyone choosing their own path." The Shapers had departed, their role as architects of evolution transformed by what they'd witnessed. "We will carry these lessons to other worlds," they had said before leaving. "The knowledge that true evolution comes not from forcing change, but from making space for all possibilities." Bill Henderson's farm, like many others, now grew both transformed and traditional crops. The fear that had once divided communities had been replaced by understanding. Children played in fields where reality shimmered with potential, shifting forms as easily as changing clothes, while their parents watched without anxiety. Thomas often stood at the spot where the first black eggs had appeared in their barn. The structure now existed in multiple states, simultaneously, both the simple wooden barn of his ancestors and a cathedral of living crystal that sang with his son's consciousness. "I think I finally understand, son," he whispered to the air that carried echoes of James's presence. "You didn't really leave us. You became the thing that lets all of us stay together, no matter what we choose to be." Marie joined him, holding his hand, as they watched the sun set in colors that no human eye could have seen before their son reshaped reality. In the distance, their transformed crops chimed in harmony with traditional wheat, each enhancing the other's existence. "He always loved this time of day," she said softly, "when everything changed, but stayed the same somehow." As if in response, the air shimmered with familiar warmth. They felt James's love now woven into existence itself, embracing them. In that moment, they were both what they had always been, and something entirely new, parents of a boy who had become reality itself, farmers tending land that existed in all states at once. The black eggs that had started everything had long since crumbled to dust. But in the end, they had hatched something far more precious than alien beings or transformed consciousness. They had hatched a new kind of existence, one where change and tradition, progress and preservation could finally coexist in harmony, all because a boy from a simple farm had loved both what was and what could be, enough to become the bridge between them.